Chapter 10 Mayhem at the Ministry. Mr. Weasley woke them after only a few hours' sleep. He used magic to pack up the tents, and they left the campsite as quickly as possible, passing Mr. Roberts at the door of his cottage. Mr. Roberts had a strange, dazed look about him, and he waved them off with a vague "Merry Christmas." "He'll be all right," said Mr. Weasley quietly, as they marched off onto the moor. Sometimes, when a person's memory's modified, it makes them a bit disoriented for a while, and that was a big thing that they had to make him forget. They heard urgent voices as they approached the spot where the Portkeys lay, and when they reached it, they found a great number of witches and wizards gathered around Basil, the keeper of the Portkeys, all clamoring to get away from the campsite as quickly as possible. Mr. Weasley had a hurried discussion with Basil. They joined the queue and were able to take an old rubber tire back to Stode's Head Hill before the sun had really risen. They walked back through Ottery St. Catchpole towards the burrow in the dawn light, talking very little because they were so exhausted, and thinking longingly of their breakfast. As they rounded the corner into the lane, the burrow came into view. A cry echoed along the damp lane. "Oh, thank goodness, thank goodness!" Mrs. Weasley, who had evidently been waiting for them in the front yard, came running towards them, still wearing her bedroom slippers, her face pale and strained, a screwed-up copy of the Daily Prophet clutched in her hand. "Arthur, I've been so worried, so worried." She flung her arms around Mr. Weasley's neck, and the Daily Prophet fell out of her limp hand onto the ground. Looking down, Harry saw the headline: "Scenes of Terror at the Quidditch World Cup," complete with the twinkling black and white photograph of the dark mark over the treetops. "You're all right," Mrs. Weasley muttered distractedly, releasing Mr. Weasley and staring around at them all with red eyes. "You're alive. Oh, boys." And to everybody's surprise, she seized Fred and George and pulled them both into such a tight hug that their heads banged together. "Ouch, Mom, you're strangling us. I shouted at you before you left," Mrs. Weasley said, starting to sob. "It's all I've been thinking about. What if you know who'd got you? And the last thing I've ever said to you was that you didn't get enough owls. Oh, Fred, George." "Come on now, Molly. We're all perfectly okay," said Mr. Weasley soothingly, prizing her off of the twins and leading her back towards the house. "Bill," he added in an undertone, "pick up that paper. I want to see what it says." When they were all crammed into the tiny kitchen, Hermione had made Mrs. Weasley a cup of very strong tea, into which Mr. Weasley insisted on pouring a shot of Ogden's Old Fire Whiskey. Bill handed his father the newspaper. Mr. Weasley scanned the front page while Percy looked over his shoulder. "I knew it," said Mr. Weasley heavily. "Ministry blunders, culprits not apprehended, lax security, dark wizards running unchecked, national disgrace. Who wrote this? Oh, of course, Rita Skeeter. That woman's got it out for the Ministry of Magic," said Percy furiously. "Last week she was saying we're wasting our time quibbling about cauldron thickness when we should be stomping out vampires, as if wasn't specifically stated in paragraph 12 of the Guidelines for Treatment of Non-Wizard Pot Humans." "Do us a favour, Perce," said Bill, yawning, "and shut up." "I mentioned," said Mr. Weasley, his eyes widening behind his glasses as he reached to the bottom of the Daily Prophet article. "Where?" sputtered Mrs. Weasley, choking on her tea and whiskey. "If I'd seen that, I'd have known you were alive." "Not by name," said Mr. Weasley. "Listen to this. If the terrified wizards and witches who waited breathlessly for news at the edge of the wood expected reassurance from the Ministry of Magic, they were sadly disappointed. A ministry official emerged some time after the appearance of the dark mark, alleging that nobody had been hurt, but refusing to give any more information. Whether this statement will be enough to squash the rumours that several bodies were removed from the woods an hour later remains to be seen." "Oh, really?" said Mr. Weasley in exasperation, handing the paper to Percy. "Nobody was hurt. What was I supposed to say? rumours that several bodies had been removed from the woods. Well, there certainly will be rumours now that she's printed that. He heaved a deep sigh. Molly, I'm going to have to go into the office. This is going to take some smoothing over. I'll come with you, father, said Percy importantly. Mr. Crouch will need all hands on deck. I can give him my cauldron report in person. He bustled out of the kitchen. Mrs. Weasley looked most upset. Arthur, you're supposed to be on holiday. This hasn't got anything to do with your office. Surely they can handle this without you. I got to go, Molly, said Mr. Weasley. I've made things worse. I'll just change into my robes, and I'll be off. Mrs. Weasley, said Harry suddenly, unable to contain himself, Hedwig hasn't arrived with a letter for me, has she? Hedwig, dear, said Mrs. Weasley distractedly. No, there hasn't been any post at all. Ron and Hermione looked curiously at Harry. With a meaningful look at both of them, he said, All right, if I go and dump my stuff in your room, Ron. Yeah, think I will too, said Ron at once. Hermione? Yes, she said quickly, and the three of them marched out of the kitchen and up the stairs. What's up, Harry? Said Ron, the moment they had closed the door to the attic room behind them. There's something I haven't told you, Harry said. On Saturday morning I woke up with my skull hurting again. Ron and Hermione's reactions were almost exactly as Harry had imagined them, back in his bedroom in Privet Drive. Hermione gasped and started making suggestions at once, mentioning a number of reference books and everyone from Albus Dumbledore to Madame Pomfrey, the Hogwarts matron. Ron simply looked dumbstruck. But he wasn't there, was he? You know who? I mean, last time his skull kept hurting, he was at Hogwarts, wasn't he? I'm sure he wasn't in Privet Drive, said Harry, but I was dreaming about him and Peter, Wormtail. I can't remember all of it now, but they were plotting to kill someone. He had teetered for a moment on the verge of saying me, but couldn't bring himself to make Hermione look any more horrified than she already did. It was only a dream, said Ron bracingly. Just a nightmare. Yep, but was it though? Said Harry, turning to look out the window at the brightening sky. It's weird, isn't it? My skull hurts, and 3 days later the Death Eaters are on the march and Voldemort's signs up in the sky again. Don't say his name, Ron hissed through gritted teeth. And remember what Professor Trelawney said, Harry went on, ignoring Ron. At the end of last year, Professor Trelawney was their divination teacher at Hogwarts. Hermione's terrified look vanished, and she let out a derisive snort. Oh, Harry, you aren't going to pay any attention to anything that old fraud says. You weren't there, said Harry. You didn't hear her. This time was different. I told you she went into a trance, a real one, and she said that the Dark Lord would rise again, greater and more terrible than ever before, and he'd managed to do it because his servant was going to go back to him, and that night Wormtail escaped. There was a silence in which Ron fidgeted absent-mindedly with a hole in his chutney cannon's bedspread. Why were you asking if Hedwig had come, Harry? Hermione asked. You were expecting a letter? I told Harry about Sirius about the scar, said Harry, shrugging. I'm waiting for his answer. Good thinking, said Ron, his expression clearing. I bet Sirius will know what to do. I hoped he'd get back to me quickly, said Harry. But we don't know where Sirius is. He could be in Africa or somewhere, couldn't he? Said Hermione reasonably. Hedwig's not going to manage that journey in a few days. Yeah, I know, said Harry, but there was a leaden feeling in his stomach as he looked out the window at the Hedwig-free sky. Come and have a game of Quidditch in the orchard, Harry, said Ron. Come on, 3 on 3. Bill, Charlie, and Fred and George will play. You can try out the Wronski feint. Ron, said Hermione, in an I don't think you're being very sensitive sort of voice. Harry doesn't want to play Quidditch right now. He's worried and he's tired. We all need to go to bed. Yeah, I want to play Quidditch, said Harry suddenly. Hang on, I'll get my firebolt. Hermione left the room, muttering something about which sounded very much like boys.